Welcome everyone, let's begin. The old cabin in the woods was a legend among the locals. Nestled deep within Pine Hollow Forest, it had stood abandoned for decades. Stories of strange happenings and eerie noises surrounded it, but no one knew the real truth. When Jack, Emma, Lucy, and Ben decided to spend a weekend there, they thought it would be a fun escape from their busy lives. They were looking forward to a few days of hiking, campfires, and ghost stories. They arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, their car loaded with supplies. The cabin looked even more dilapidated than they had expected. Its wooden walls were weathered, the windows dusty and cracked, but it had a rustic charm. As they unpacked, Jack joked about the cabin's haunted reputation. "Do you think we'll see any ghosts?" he teased, grinning at Emma. She rolled her eyes. "I'm more worried about the roof caving in." They settled in, unloading sleeping bags and lighting a fire in the old stone fireplace. As dusk fell, they gathered around the fire, the flickering flames casting shadows on the walls. Ben, always the storyteller, began recounting the local legends. "People say this cabin was once owned by a recluse named Harold," Ben said, his voice low and dramatic. "He was a strange man, kept to himself. One night he disappeared without a trace. Some say he was taken by the spirits of the forest." Emma shivered. "Creepy, but it's just a story, right?" Lucy, usually the skeptical one, seemed unusually quiet. She stared into the fire, lost in thought. "I don't know," she said finally. "Places like this, they have a way of holding on to things. Memories, spirits." The group fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and the night grew darker. Later that night, they all retired to their sleeping bags. The cabin was cold, and the wind howled outside, making the wooden structure creak and groan. Emma couldn't sleep. She lay there, listening to the sounds of the forest, when she heard a faint whisper. It was so soft, she thought she might be imagining it. "Emma." She sat up, heart pounding. "Who's there?" she whispered. There was no answer. She lay back down, telling herself it was just the wind. But the whisper came again, louder this time. "Emma, come outside." Terrified, she woke Jack. "I heard something," she whispered. "Someone's outside." Jack listened for a moment but heard nothing. "It's just your imagination," he said. "Go back to sleep." But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. She lay awake, listening until exhaustion finally overtook her. The next morning, Emma told the others about the whispering. Lucy's face grew pale. "I heard it too," she said. "It called my name." Ben and Jack exchanged uneasy glances. "Maybe we should leave," Jack suggested, but Ben shook his head. "We came here to have fun. Let's not let a little spookiness ruin our weekend." They spent the day hiking through the forest, trying to shake off the eerie feeling. But as night fell, the sense of unease returned. They sat around the fire again, trying to ignore the growing darkness outside. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door. They all jumped, staring at each other in shock. Jack stood up, grabbing a flashlight. "Who's there?" he called. There was no answer. He slowly approached the door and opened it. The flashlight beam revealed nothing but the empty forest. "Probably just an animal," Jack said, trying to sound confident, but his hands were shaking. They decided to go to bed early, hoping to sleep through the night without incident. But the whispering returned, louder and more insistent. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Lucy, Ben, come outside." Lucy sat up, trembling. "We need to leave. Now." But it was too late. The door burst open, and a cold wind swept through the cabin. The fire went out, plunging them into darkness. They huddled together, terrified. A shadowy figure appeared in the doorway. It was tall and indistinct, more of a presence than a person. The whispering grew louder, filling the cabin with its chilling voice. "Leave this place." Jack tried to shine his flashlight on the figure, but the beam flickered and died. The shadow advanced, and they could feel an overwhelming sense of dread. "Run!" Ben shouted, grabbing Emma's hand. They bolted for the door, but the shadow blocked their path. They could feel its cold, clammy touch as it reached for them. In a panic, they ran to the back of the cabin and broke a window. One by one, they climbed out into the cold night, hearts pounding. They ran through the forest, not daring to look back. They didn't stop until they reached their car. Jack fumbled with the keys, finally managing to start the engine. They sped away, the cabin disappearing into the darkness behind them. They drove in silence, too shaken to speak. It wasn't until they reached the safety of the town that they finally dared to breathe. "What was that?" Emma whispered. "I don't know," Jack replied, his voice trembling. "But we're never going back." The group agreed. They never spoke of that night again, each trying to forget the terror they had experienced. But the memory of the whispering voice and the shadowy figure haunted them. Years later, another group of friends decided to spend a weekend at the old cabin. They laughed off the stories, thinking them just local legends. They never returned. The news of the missing group spread quickly, and it wasn't long before it reached Jack, Emma, Lucy, and Ben. They sat together in a coffee shop, the unease they had buried surfacing once more. "We have to do something," Lucy said, her voice trembling. "We can't let what happened to us happen to anyone else." Jack nodded. "We need to warn people. We need to go back." Emma looked at him in shock. "Are you crazy? We barely escaped last time." Ben, who had been silent, finally spoke. "If we don't, more people could disappear. We need to find out what's happening and stop it." Reluctantly, they agreed. They spent the next few days preparing, gathering supplies and equipment. They knew they had to be ready for anything. The drive back to Pine Hollow Forest was filled with a tense silence. As they approached the cabin, the familiar sense of dread returned. The once inviting forest now seemed dark and menacing. They arrived at dusk, the shadows long and ominous. The cabin stood exactly as they had left it, as if waiting for their return. They parked the car a short distance away, not wanting to alert whatever was inside. Armed with flashlights and a sense of grim determination, they made their way to the cabin. The door creaked open, revealing the dark interior. The air inside was cold and heavy, the same oppressive feeling from before. They entered cautiously, the beams of their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The cabin was eerily silent, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Jack led the way to the room where they had heard the whispers. "We need to find out what's in there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They pushed the door open, revealing the same small, dark room. The old trunk was back, sitting ominously in the center. Emma took a deep breath and approached it. "This is where it started," she said. "Maybe there's something here that can help us understand." She opened the trunk, revealing the same old photographs, letters, and journal. They sifted through the contents, looking for any clue that might explain the cabin's dark history. Lucy found an old, faded photograph of a man standing in front of the cabin. "This must be Harold," she said, "the man who disappeared." Ben picked up the journal and began to read. Harold wrote about strange occurrences, just like we experienced. He mentioned a shadowy figure and whispering voices. He believed the cabin was built on sacred ground and that the spirits of the forest were angry. Emma's eyes widened. That must be it. The spirits are protecting this place. They don't want anyone here. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. Their breath turned to mist as an icy wind swept through the cabin. The whispering began again, louder and more insistent than ever. "Leave this place, or suffer the same fate." The shadowy figure appeared once more, emerging from the darkness. It was larger and more menacing than they remembered. The room filled with an overwhelming sense of dread. "We need to go," Jack said urgently. "Now!" They ran for the door, but it slammed shut, trapping them inside. The shadow advanced, its cold, clammy touch sending waves of terror through them. Ben grabbed a piece of wood from the floor and swung it at the shadow, but it passed right through, as if the figure was made of smoke. "There's no way out!" Lucy screamed, panic rising in her voice. Emma remembered the letters and photographs. "We need to appease the spirits," she said. "Maybe there's something in Harold's journal that can help." Ben flipped through the journal frantically, searching for anything that might offer a solution. "Here," he said. "Harold tried to communicate with the spirits. He offered them gifts and asked for forgiveness." "We don't have any gifts," Jack said desperately. Emma grabbed the journal and held it up. "Maybe this will do. It's a part of Harold's life. Maybe it will be enough." She placed the journal in the center of the room and backed away. "We come in peace," she said, her voice trembling. "We ask for your forgiveness. We will leave and never return." The shadow paused, the whispering growing softer. For a moment it seemed as if their offering might be accepted, but then the shadow surged forward, engulfing the room in darkness. The whispering became a deafening roar, filling their minds with terror. Jack, Emma, Lucy, and Ben screamed as the shadow closed in, its icy touch freezing them in place. They felt their strength drain away, their bodies growing weak and numb. As the darkness consumed them, they realized too late that there was no escape. The spirits of the forest were unforgiving, and the cabin's curse would claim them all. The cabin stood silent once more, its dark secrets hidden within its walls. The group was never seen again, their fate becoming another legend in the long, dark history of Pine Hollow Forest. Years passed, and the stories of the haunted cabin grew, each telling more chilling than the last. But no one dared to venture into the woods, the warnings of the missing and the whispers in the night serving as a grim reminder of the horrors that awaited those who did not heed them. The cabin remained, a silent sentinel to the terror that lurked within, waiting for the next group of unsuspecting souls to cross its threshold.